This is one of the most requested planes on this channel so far, and its story is so confusing and detail-oriented, the only way I can sum it up is by asking, what the f*** is this airplane? Today we're going to take a look at the Eurofighter, known by acronyms such as the EF-2000 if you're German, the F-2000 if you're Italian, the C-16 Typhoon if you're Spanish, or the Typhoon if you're British. The Eurofighter is a multi-role aircraft made on the basis of an air superiority dogfighter, but more importantly, it's one of the few aircraft in history to successfully overcome the most deadly adversary on the planet: international politics.
How the blood-soaked Protestant did you do that?
Aside from being a flying miracle, the Eurofighter is just as much a symbol as it is a weapon. By overcoming the ever-living dogpile that is international politics, aka the Power Grab Foundation, the Eurofighter also became one of the only platforms in history designed to prop up multiple economies. And it took its time to get there, no thanks to some of the people who stayed and some of the people who didn't. Sometime in the early 1970s, the UK and Germany both started coming to the realization that the Soviets were working on new fighter toys, while they didn't really have any dedicated dogfighters for the long-term future. Some of their aircraft are getting old, and it's time to replace them with a modern contender. No big deal, this is standard procedure, and the solution is very simple. You make a new one. The first country to start acting on this appears to be the United Kingdom, who in 1972 issued a requirement called Air Staff Target, or AST-403, for a short takeoff and vertical landing or STOVL aircraft to replace the Harrier and the Jaguar. However, this requirement was split in two in 1979, with AST-409 then replacing the Harrier with the Harrier II, and AST-403 being reworked to demand a high-agility air superiority fighter. And it is at this point that Germany officially enters the chat.
Hello!
See, the cost of creating a new fighter program is never cheap, but this is late Cold War UK and Germany we're talking about. Their defense budgets are like trying to fit into your pants from college. It is a stretch. A new aircraft would be exorbitantly expensive for what both nations could afford, so both British Aerospace and Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, or MBB, would go up to their respective governments with an idea.
The idea was to bring together a group of remarkable people, see if they could become something more. See if they could work together when we needed them to fight the battles that we never could.
It's a simple philosophy. If doing it yourself is too much, bring friends. So in late 1969, the British and the Germans would join forces to form the European Combat Aircraft, or ECA, program, and then they would invite the French to join them. However, as we learned from the Rafale story, the French wanted industrial control of the program, and they wanted a different plane overall, so the ECA program would fall apart in early 1981. But the UK could not afford to give up on the program because around this time, the RAF's air-to-air capability age was starting to show. By the early 1980s, the BAC Lightning was starting to enter retirement, and the RAF Phantoms probably weren't going to last much longer. The Tornado did have its air defense variant, or ADV, but because it was a fast interceptor bomber and not an air superiority fighter, the Tornado wasn't going to be much of a fountain of youth for handling fighters. And that fountain was also starting to dry up, because at the same time the Lightning and the Phantoms were starting to leave, the Tornado was starting to pass the peak of its production, meaning that production numbers would be all downhill from here. So all in all, the UK is facing down three different problems. One, they would not have a fighter that could rival the newest Soviet platforms. Two, the UK did not have a means to compete with the United States and France in the air-to-air fighter export market, leaving the door pretty much wide open to the F-16 and Mirage families to dominate. And three, their domestic aircraft manufacturing industry would dwindle out if they couldn't find a replacement.
Somebody think of something and think of it fast.
Germany also had this problem, and other nations stood to benefit from it, such as the third partner of the Panavia Tornado program, Italy. So in April of 1981, the Panavia partners launched the Agile Combat Aircraft, or ACA program. However, this seemed to go as smoothly as the last time, because by early 1983, Germany and Italy folded in the ACA game and left. At this point, the UK is like, to heck with it, I'll do it myself, and continued that program on their own internal funding as the Experimental Aircraft Program, or EAP. But the collaborative construction game would also get a major buff that same January when the soon-to-be Lord Michael Heseltine was appointed the Secretary of State for Defense. And when it came to multinational projects, Heseltine was perfect. From 1972 to 1974, he had worked as a minister in the Department for Trade and Industry on three different collaborative projects: the Jaguar, the Concorde, and the Tornado, which is like the 3 biggest collaborative aircraft projects the UK has worked on up to this point. Better still, he had experienced each project along a different stage of its development, seeing the Jaguar entering RAF service, the Concorde making sales along with the French, and the Tornado during its development. The British have just brought in their anime protagonist with their ability to see the whole picture, and they put him in charge. Things are about to get done.
Let's get to work, people.
And in that same month, Heseltine made it clear that the only way the UK would be able to develop a fighter that could compete with their Soviet and American counterparts was if they went and got some help. In his own words, quote, "If we could avoid the duplication of design and development effort which has up till now characterized the military aircraft scene in Europe, the prizes would be enormous. The participating nations would start with their own requirements amounting in total up to 800 to 1,000 aircraft and might readily expect to approach that number in the export market. Only Dassault with their Mirage series of designs, of which some 1,500 have been sold abroad, have come close to providing a challenge to the dominance of the United States. Collaboration, if attainable, would thus open up new export opportunities for British industry. Equally important, the financial burden of developing a major new aircraft would be shared among 5 partners, to that extent easing the pressure on the defense budget. He also calculated that a domestically produced fighter jet would be 15 to 20% more expensive than a collaborative one, making the collaborative one a cheaper option.
I'm talking about this.
So collaboration it was, and on the 29th of April 1983, the Future Combat Aircraft Program was formed between the interested nations of the UK, Germany, Italy, and surprisingly, France and Spain. Spain had only joined NATO the year before, and they had only heard about the FCA within a month or so in advance of the meeting to sign on to the program. The French, meanwhile, weren't even sure if they wanted to join the program. No surprise given how well the ECA went, but Germany strongly insisted that France be included. For whatever reason. It could have been access to their export markets, or it could have been an extra person to spend money on the fighter jet, but either way, France is now back in the FCA system, which was renamed to the Future European Fighter Aircraft, or FIFA, that December. However, the addition of France would yet again prove to be a tactical error in judgment.
You done goofed.
Over the next year, France became more and more of a problem child for the FIFA program, and it seemed relatively clear that the issue primarily remained with the French government and Dassault. Some French companies like Snecma appeared to be willing to cooperate with the FIFA collab, but without clear support from the French government, they were unwilling to actually make any helpful steps forward. Besides the previously established want for a naval fighter, France also wanted air-to-ground capability in their new planes, something that the rest of the alliance didn't care for in their focus on air superiority and air defense. France would also keep pushing back on the weight requirement and demand a lighter airframe of about 7.5 tons with no room for expansion due to changes. The rest of the consortium was willing to settle for a weight requirement of about 9 tons, despite having an expectation that they would actually end up with a plane of about 10.5 tons. Then France began to insist on leading the program centrally under Dassault instead of a cooperative leadership between all industrial parties, trying to collect the program's authority under their wings only. When that didn't work, they would get more and more stubborn over all of the above issues and began refusing to coordinate between the other national industries and their own. And as if the borderline temper tantrum wasn't already annoying, it would then bloom into a full-blown stupid tree, with the French back-challenging the accuracy of engineering figures that had been analyzed carefully and agreed upon for months or even years at this point.
I'ma plant me a dumbass tree!
It was getting to the point that the Germans, Italians, and Spanish were starting to doubt their own positions a bit. But after consulting with the British yet again, they would firm back up behind the British position. The stalemating and blue-balling over trying to answer the simple question of what the is this airplane lasted so long and got so consistent, there was a major concern that France was deliberately sabotaging the program to prevent export sales effectiveness, and to stall the program long enough to allow their Mirage 2000 line to take hold of the export market before the Eurofighter could get a chance. By July of 1985, France had effectively withdrawn from negotiations and was pretty much only submitting demands. The final nail in the coffin would come when Heseltine, frustrated with France but still clinging to the idea that they could be appeased into cooperating, reached out to all nations that same month to take part in UK simulations to help finalize the aircraft specifications. And what happened was the French basically came back and said they would rather scrap everything they'd decided on so far and then need another 6 to 9 months to thoroughly reinvestigate the technical specifications of the aircraft. However, of course, they were, quote, ready to start project definition at once on the basis of their own design. Translation, we're not working on this project unless all of you get down on your knees and lick our boots while we say how this goes.
Mom said that he was stubborn, but this is just asinine.
And that's it. That's the last straw. The rest of everybody else is done with France playing Vegeta. So on the 28th of August 1985, the UK, Germany, Spain, and Italy would all sign the Turin Agreement that would finally bring about a consensus on the desired weight and other preliminary requirements without France, effectively kicking the French out of the program. France, to absolutely nobody's surprise, whips around with a shocked Pikachu face decades before memes were a thing and tries to get back on board. They made repeated attempts to rejoin the Eurofighter program and extend olive branches, and even tried to poach Spain for the Rafale program later. But by this point, everybody involved had more than enough of France, and they were not falling for any of their bullshit. France was out, and no amount of screaming at the gate was going to get them back in, not even when President Mitterrand himself said that he supported the EFA program and blamed the failure on some of the technicians. Without the French interference, the program would finally begin making some headway. The British had been continuing their development of the experimental aircraft program, and by August of 1986, a flying EAP technology demonstrator prototype would finally take to the skies, followed by a performance at the Farnborough Air Show the following month. The partner nations would finish off the prototype construction by 1989, but the seas of change were already getting rough again. You'd think that kicking France out would have been the cure-all to the project. Nope, because then the Germans would step up to the plate. Germany began taking issue with the choice of aircraft components because they wanted to prioritize cost over capability, including a preference for a modified American AN APG-65 radar used on the FA-18 Hornets, which they were already installing on the ICE upgrade package for the F-4F Phantoms. The UK, however, and to some extent Italy and Spain, wanted performance over cost and were willing to push the envelope a bit to stay on par with the Soviets. There was also the issue of engine choice, but that was eventually resolved with the choice of the Eurojet EJ200s. However, the longest point of contention was buying away the radar, which the British wanted to be a variant of the Ferranti Blue Vixen used on the Sea Harrier FA-2s. Germany was having some France-level stubbornness over having a less capable and lower-cost radar that could be replaced over time with midlife refits, even trying to back-challenge the radar statistics in favor of their own designs in the same way the French had for the aircraft's weight. This was primarily due to the various factions in Germany's coalition government getting America-level non-cooperative over their defense spending and refusing to work with the Eurofighter program's funding requirements. There was also the fact that Ferranti had made some poor financial decisions, aka recklessly purchasing an American company they later found out had both committed fraud to inflate its sale value and made a significant number of illegal arms sales.
Yikes.
However, the Ferranti radar was more capable and equally costly and risky to the proposed German alternative. But Germany would only accept the radar if they were 100% sure they wouldn't bear any financial risk from getting the radar delivered to them late. So now the problem is just a whole political shit show that would be better off being the subject of its own video. And the thing that finally swung the Germans over to accepting the Ferranti radar was that, unbeknownst to the entire program, the General Electric Company, GEC, a British electronics company that is not to be confused with the American electronics company General Electric, or GE, had been negotiating to buy Ferranti defense systems, which provided the perfect means to convince Germany that the UK could accept the risk for the radar, and was instrumental in finally shelving that debate for good so they could get on with the program. The GEC acquisition was completed in 1990 and finalized by the start of 1991, and by 1994, all Eurofighter requirements were finally agreed upon. The first Eurofighter prototype, that being Development Aircraft 1, would first fly on the 27th of March 1994 out of the city of Nanjing in the German state of Bavaria. And yes, I said state. Germany apparently has 16 of them. And upon discovering this, I naturally did the autism thing and started wondering who else has states. Austria has 9, Australia has 6, Brazil has 26, and India has 28. Hell, Mexico has 31 and Nigeria has second place with 36, and there are a few other countries I haven't even mentioned. If only school taught me as much as aviation history.
Yo, that was some in-a education.
But back to our scheduled program. By 1996, the Eurofighter partners would also reach an agreement on the work sharing of production, which is arguably one of the most unique traits of the Eurofighter as a whole. Because the Eurofighter is basically a flying multinational piece of IKEA furniture. Not only is the program ownership split between the 4 countries, 1/3 to the UK, another to Germany, and the last third split into 9ths, 2 to Italy and 1 to Spain, but the actual airframe is manufactured in pieces by all 4 primary partner nations in the facilities of 3 companies. The UK and BAE Systems make the cockpit, the vertical tail, and the front chunk of the fuselage from the intake forward. Germany and Airbus make the body center section, Italy and Leonardo make the rear end and the left wing, and Spain, also with Airbus, makes the right wing. The engines and radar are produced by their respective companies, and then all parts are shipped to the ordering country and assembled at home, customized as required, and sent into service. This process is generally a bit more expensive than standard manufacturing procedure, but it comes with the massive benefit of propping up the indigenous aerospace manufacturing industries of each country, and thus an additional pool to generate a highly skilled labor force. Bah, making the different parts in different countries means they probably aren't gonna match up and cause all kinds of flight problems. No, this isn't the 1940s. Italy's not mass-producing their equipment in family-owned workshops with no standardization like they did in World War II. The Europeans also aren't working with the United States, so they're not spending half their time converting between freedom fractions and leaf water units. They use the same measurement system, they have the same quality control standards, the same requirements, and probably all bought the same manufacturing equipment from the same industrial equipment producer, meaning they're all built to the same tolerancing if you don't fuck it up. And even if they're using different gear, the tolerancing should be the same anyways because the multinational program dictates what those tolerances are. Flipping over a wing profile and printing a mirror image to the same dimensions isn't rocket science. This isn't the Soviet Union we're talking about here.
Leave me out of this!
And with the production sharing finalized and all nations refusing Boeing offers for FA-18 Hornets and Super Hornets somewhere along the line, countries could finally begin placing their orders, and this is where Eurofighter designations really start to get confusing. This is the part where I started to ask, okay, what the f is this airplane? There are different levels of capability that were installed over the course of the Eurofighter service life, and these capability levels do not necessarily correlate to their production quantities. The most commonly used term of tranche is one of these production terms, which only dictates the large-scale contracts for ordering aircraft. Each tranche is broken down into batches, which are then broken down even further into blocks, and blocks can also have lettered subvariants like A, B, C, D, whatever. And of those designations, the one that tells you exactly which capabilities that particular Eurofighter has is the block number. We can pretty much ignore the subvariants, thank God, because we're gonna need those brain cells. Each block mixes a different combination of hardware known as a service release package, or SRP, and software known as a production software package, or PSP. These combine into a production system configuration, or PSC, which dictates the exact capability level that is installed into every block number. Are you confused yet? Good, because it's about to get so much worse. So much so that I am going to skip the blocks and PSCs and only talk about tranches. Because the intricacy of this plane's production is so German engineered that it is bullshit. I genuinely feel bad for whichever poor logistics guy has to keep track of all this, because that guy's brain is probably doing something to the effect of
In the shower, bro.
The Tranche 1 contract was signed on September 18, 1998 and covered 148 planes. 18 of these would be purchased by Austria in July of 2003, but they would reduce the order to 15. Tranche 1 would enter service with the core nations in July 2003 and reach initial operating capability in 2004, with Austria's Eurofighters being diverted 3 years later. Still following? Good. Tranche 2. December 14, 2004, the core nations sign up for 236 more planes. The following year, Saudi Arabia shows up at the UK's front door asking for a replacement for their Panavia Tornadoes, and they sign up for 72 Tranche 2 Eurofighters, which would also begin delivery 3 years later. Then there's Tranche 3. This one got split into A and B for budget reasons, and then 3B was cancelled for budget reasons, so now we're just stuck with Tranche 3A. That was signed on July 31st, 2009 for 112 planes, with several export buyers lining up for them. Oman ordered 12 Tranche 3As from Italy in 2012, followed by 28 for Kuwait in April 2016, and 24 for Qatar on December 10, 2017 as an early Christmas present. And then we get to another capability detail that makes me want to dig a tranche for my brain. because the Tranche 2 and later the Tranche 3A Eurofighters would start receiving phased enhancements, or capability upgrade packages to make them more powerful without having to buy new planes. The Phase 1 enhancement, or P1E, would be contracted back in 2007 and split into two versions, A and B. P1EA would go to the Tranche 2 Eurofighter starting in 2013, and P1EB would go to the Tranche 3As starting in 2015. But overall, they would both be integrating avionics and system upgrades along with American ground attack munitions, IRIS-T, not to be confused with IRST, heat-seeking missiles, and C-model AMRAAMs. Unfortunately, P1E arrived too late for the Eurofighter to see anything other than air-to-air operations during the 2011 NATO-led intervention in Libya called Operation El Dorado Canyon. And it's not like it's seen any large-scale military actions besides this one, so while it technically has been used in combat, there's probably a reason you don't see the program flaunting the marketing buzzwords of combat proven, because it'd be way more of a stretch for this plane than any other aircraft you could even technically use the term for. And before you say anything, the Gripen hasn't seen combat ever, so you can't call it combat proven at all. That's not marketing, that's false advertising.
Same difference.
Then in late 2013 to early 2014, Phase 2 would be contracted and also split up into A and B, with P2EA adding avionics upgrades, the Defensive Aid Subsystem or DOS, and the Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and P2EB primarily adding the Meteor ramjet-powered Beyond Visual Range Air-to-Air Missile or BVRAM. Then we get to Phase 3. Phase 3 is a bit special because both the A and B variants were only contracted by specific countries, and one of them wasn't even a partner nation. Phase 3A was contracted in 2014 by just the UK to upgrade the Typhoon's existing weapons integrations and add the Brimstone 2 air-to-ground missiles. The Phase 3B Eurofighters, however, were the ones ordered by Kuwait, and they wanted a lot of new toys. The Phase 3Bs would get the Sniper Laser Designation Pod, some new ground attack munitions, and on top of that, replace the older mechanical Captor M radar with the Captor E AESA radar, also known as the E-Scan Radar Mark 0, and these planes would be first delivered in December of 2021. Pause. I'm gonna say that again, but slower. The first country to get a Eurofighter in service with an AESA radar, the most advanced type of radar on the planet, was not one of the core 4 countries, but one of the export buyers. I reiterate, what the is this airplane? Also, this must be what it feels like looking at the F-15 SA and QA from the outside.
Good God, it's strange to see this from the outside.
But Kuwait wouldn't be the only one to get those capabilities, because the core nations would follow suit the year before their deliveries began. On November 11, 2020, Germany would become the first country to order the Tranche 4 Eurofighters, which would come with that AESA E-Scan radar and many of the other improvements made in the Phase 3B enhancements. They would order 38 units, and then Spain would also get in line for the Tranche 4s, ordering 20 Tranche 4s in June of 2022 and 25 more in 2023. There are already proposals for the Tranche 5 Eurofighters, and while most of what they're going to bring to the table is unknown, on September 27, 2024, one of the RAF's Eurofighters made a test flight with the new European Common Radar System Mark II, or ECRS Mark II, which appears to be at least partially focused on upgrading the radar's electronic warfare potential. But more importantly, the ECRS Mark II is speculated to be able to fix a long-standing issue with the Eurofighter's radars, though I'm unsure of what that issue is. As of December 2024, Italy ordered 24 of those Tranche 5s, along with a June 2024 announcement that Germany would be buying 20 of the same by the end of 2025. That still leaves the UK with the most Eurofighters contracted at 232, followed closely by Germany at 218, Spain with 152, and Italy with 145. That means, as of July 3rd, 2025, when I crunched those numbers, a grand total of 898 Eurofighters have been contracted for production by 9 different countries. So now that we finally made it through the insanity that is building the damn thing, we can finally take a look at what a modern-day Eurofighter actually does. For starters, the entire machine is driven by 2 EJ200 turbofan engines. These 1,200-hour lifespan European thrust sticks put out a max of 13,500 pounds or 60 kilonewtons of thrust without the burners lit, and just over 20,000 pounds or 90 kilonewtons at full burner. That kind of power translates to a max speed of Mach 2 up high or Mach 1.25 down on the sea level deck, and lets the European Danger Dorito supercruise at a claimed Mach 1.15 to Mach 1.5, depending on your weapons load, your altitude, and most importantly, your source. Even with a full missile kit on board, this thing can go from full brakes to airborne in less than 8 seconds and go straight up. The Eurojet Consortium did explore a thrust vectoring option as well, but it didn't really go anywhere, which is probably for the better because at this point thrust vectoring is pretty much just an airshow circus trick.
I feel like a circus animal doing tricks.
At least in terms of concept and layout, it is pretty easy to draw a lot of parallels between the Eurofighter and the Rafale, which probably fuels the never-ending rivalry between the two. The Eurofighter also relies heavily on composites in its airframe to achieve its speed, lightening the aircraft to being 11,000 kilograms or roughly 24,250 pounds empty, thanks to its being only 15% metal. The rest is either made of carbon fiber or glass-reinforced plastic, or it's just the canopy. These composites also help to reduce the radar cross-section, but it is very much not a stealth plane, which isn't a problem because the Eurofighter wasn't made to hide, she was made to dance. Most core nation Eurofighters have the mechanical Captor M radar, but the latest ones sent to Kuwait have that Captor E AESA radar, which is unique because they put it on a gimbal mount. A gimbal-mounted AESA radar not only has all the tracking, detection, radar return, and jamming resistance advantages of a normal AESA radar, but you can also mechanically swing it around, giving you some of the advantages of side-scan radars without the added weight of fixed chipmunk cheek arrays. And if it does have to get a little closer, say for tracking a stealth target, any versions that aren't the early German models also come with the Pirate Infrared Search and Track, or IRST, letting a pilot keep an eye on somebody using only their heat returns. The Eurofighter also comes with some degree of sensor fusion, which lets it do things like merge data into usable information for the pilot in the middle of the flight to project onto the cockpit displays, or fire on an unknown or hard-to-track target and have a bunch of different systems play a game of telephone to trade off guidance data as needed to make sure that chuckle-nut downrange gets converted to spare change. Because they're gonna need all those spare pieces of metal all over the place to pay the ferryman to get to the afterlife. And once you get in close, you can also throw a short-range missile in their direction with a gaze that can melt metal and a voice that'll put you to sleep, aka a helmet-mounted sight and direct voice input controls, meaning you can tell Jarvis to take somebody's head off and it will.
Jarvis, do me a favor and blow Mark 42.
And it needs that kind of flexibility because this thing was made for agility from the ground up. Just like the Rafale, it has a delta wing with 2 pairs of flaperons for pitch, roll, and flaps. Unlike the Rafale, though, it has a dedicated air brake. But also, just like the Rafale, it has a pair of foreplanes which do not move independently of one another and have their movement linked, resulting in an unstable airframe that is managed by a quadruple redundant fly-by-wire control system. However, the Eurofighter treats slow flying conditions like getting stuck behind a Prius going 20 under the speed limit in the right lane. It does not care what the human in the equation wants, speed is mandatory and you better step aside. The Eurofighter's flight computer will actually override the pilot to recover your energy if you get too slow, even if you're in the middle of something, like a dogfight. So pilots have to watch their speed in the middle of a fight to prevent Skynet from taking over their airplane. But the excellent maneuverability that layout gives it is also great for wild weasel missions, you know, activating a plane's trap card. The Eurofighter comes in with built-in electronic jamming capabilities for suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses missions, housed in the pair of pods bolted onto the wingtips, which also come with the neat benefit of housing a pair of deployable towed decoys. The latest version of that system also comes with the Defensive Aid Subsystem, or DAS, that we mentioned earlier, which acts as a data filter that automatically sorts through and prioritizes incoming threats for pilots to respond to. And we haven't even gotten to all the extra stuff it could bolt on. The Eurofighter can strap on up to 3 drop tanks to add to its already insane 7,600 kilograms or roughly 17,000 pounds of internal fuel, which becomes a part of its 13 hardpoints that can carry almost as much weight in Ruin Your Day technology. We're talking 7,500 kilograms or 16,500 pounds of a long list of weapons and gas power slung underneath. And that list includes things like a 27mm Mauser autocannon with 150 rounds, the Meteor BV ram and AMRAM, the latter of which it can apparently fire with its radar and passive tracking mode, the IRIS-T heat-seeking missile, and the Advanced Short-Range Air-to-Air Missile, or ASRAM, heat-seeker for turning planes into potholes. But if it's the ground that's throwing things at you, you can still throw things back, such as American dumb bombs, JDAMs, and paveways, or more local flavors such as the Brimstone missiles, the Spear 3, Taurus, Taurus and Storm Shadow cruise missiles, the Marta-ER anti-ship missiles, and the AAR-GM anti-radiation missiles, along with 3 different targeting pods, the Sniper, the Lightning series, and the Damocles. This thing can even pack on a Recce XR aerial reconnaissance pod if you need to remind the enemy that it also just so happens to be picture day on their worst day ever.
It's picture day tomorrow!
And since the Typhoon was also designed to be cheap to maintain despite its over $100 million price tag, it has been well suited to its long service life. And it was also designed to be easy to upgrade, letting it become just as much a testbed for the next generation of aircraft as it is a long-lived miracle of an existing one. So in summation, while the Eurofighter might not have a whole lot of practice in swinging with the big leagues, I wouldn't be quick to try removing it, because if that development story has anything to say about it, the Eurofighter isn't going anywhere without a fight. Thank you for watching. We got merch and other links in the description, and if you like what you saw, please consider checking out some of my other videos. You might like what you find. Until next time, dismissed. The Germans want to give this thing an AI from a company called Helsing.